This ship is sinking fast, all because they've run this product into the ground without making much of an effort to improve it. They've essentially destroyed themselves from within. But not to worry, the Brewers still can be a good team if the other 4 teams in their division aren't as good as they are trying to be, if the Brewers offense starts to get their shit together, if the ownership decides to start investing at least a little more into the team, if American Family Field doesn't collapse from the pain it's had to endure since its birth, if really a whole lot falls into place. So even if it's possible, just like anything, I wouldn't hold my breath. Oh. Oh my God. Yeah, that's my dumbass. The same dumbass that doubted this Milwaukee Brewers team. One that just rolled on to yet another division title with such a young, talented team. So young at points where they have a player who couldn't even legally drink during the team celebration. I'm going to give myself about 5% credit in this video, even though I feel like that's probably too much, but I'll start with that 5% because that 5% was the start of this 2024 Brewers team. It's kind of the whole point as to why I and a lot of other people doubted the crap out of them, this organization, and that starts when the shocking news of their longtime manager, Craig Counsell, left for the Cubs. Craig Counsell, the man who'd been their manager since 2015, someone who played for the Brewers, and someone who grew up 15 minutes away from Milwaukee, a place he stayed to raise his family, yeah, that guy left the Brewers to manage the Cubs, the literal worst team he could have gone to from the perspective of anyone associated with the Brewers, whether it be their fans, their players, coaches, whatever. So that was what I thought at the time, sign number 1, telling us that the Brewers were about to enter a dark period. They just got done going one and done in the playoffs again, another postseason gone to waste after a division win, and the offseason somehow started off worse. And sign number 2, the one that led me to make this video, the Corbin Burnes trade. I just felt like all the signs were there, telling us that the Brewers were about to potentially be a last place team, and I definitely wasn't alone in that. I mean, think about it. The Cubs just took Counsell from Milwaukee. The Cardinals, even though bad in 2023, still had good players and were expected to be better. And then you had the 2 up-and-coming teams in Cincinnati and Pittsburgh. So all that was left was the Brewers, who just seemed there. It may seem silly to call a team that just won their division and had done so too the last 3 years there, but it just looked like they were turning a dark tide and that a new era was beginning in the National League Central. And it took literally less than a single game for me to realize, wait a minute. This team is out for blood. It was too early to be sure, but the first game of the entire season couldn't even finish without the Brewers getting all feisty, but in a good way, if that makes sense. But really quick, if you're alive and breathing, like the video and subscribe if you haven't yet, or just wait to see if you enjoy the video and then make a decision. That works too. The Brewers started this year off in New York to play the Mets. And during an 8th inning where they were up 3-1, there was a chance for the Mets to turn to until Rhys Hoskins knocked Jeff McNeil over. McNeil was immediately pissed. The bench is cleared. Hoskins mocked McNeil by doing the crybaby motion. And remember, Hoskins used to be on the Phillies, so McNeil, I guess, had a history of Hoskins sliding hard, and this was the final straw. Well, this ended up being the worst thing for McNeil and the Mets to do, because the next day, as Mets fans poured down the booze, Hoskins went 3 for 4, which included a 2-run homer, and since they couldn't get him out, the only thing they could do at this point was throw behind him. So it's pretty clear who won this battle. The Brewers went on to win this game and the next two, starting out the year with a sweep of the Mets, and again, it was at this moment where I realized, okay, this Brewers team might not only just be good, but have an edge to them. It's even more than I thought. And for the first part of the season, the Brewers were basically a group of guys going on tour around the country to piss different guys off. It was pretty hilarious. A couple weeks later, it was the Orioles who got mad at Willy Adames for some reason. Then the Rays in a game that featured Jose Siri getting swung at. Then the Red Sox with their reliever Chris Martin getting mad at them for bunting, which prompted the benches to clear. Then they pissed Tommy Pham off, which isn't very hard to do, but they did that too. And the bottom line with all these incidents, at least from what I took from it, was that this team wasn't taking any shit from anybody. And I loved it. I mean, play with some edge, play with some fire. Don't let anyone come after you, whether it's Jeff McNeil, Chris Martin, Tommy Pham, some asshole on YouTube, and show those idiots who to be afraid of. And The Brewers have only continued to do the damn thing. First things first, I gotta start with the manager, Pat Murphy. This man entered a seemingly impossible situation, at least from the outside looking in. Craig Counsell was beloved in Milwaukee. I already went over how tied to the city he is, and he was successful, leading this team to several postseason appearances, so for him to leave to anybody was such a gut punch, I'm sure, especially to leave for the Cubs of all damn teams. So to replace him was Pat Murphy, a man who had been Counsell's bench coach since he took the Brewers job all the way back in 2015, which, get this, Murphy was actually Craig Counsell's coach in college at Notre Dame. So when Counsell left, the Brewers went with Pat to take over, which I think was a great idea, as we can now of course see, considering he was familiar with the organization already. He wasn't walking into anything new, and he's done a great job keeping everything on track, making it seem like their previous manager never left and their previous ace was never traded. Despite the manager being on the older side of things, this team is pretty young, which I guess is a good balance to have, and this team as a whole is pretty similar to what they've been in the past. They're not going to blow you away on offense, they're not some juggernaut, but they have enough with the bats to complement a really good pitching staff. That's how it's been for years, and that didn't change in 2024. The only thing that did change was some of the names. Starting with the offense with some of these new names, let's begin with the first guy who put the Brewers on the map this year before day one was even over. Rhys Hoskins. Hoskins overall hasn't been great. Overall, his offensive numbers have been just about average, but I think that's totally fine and appropriate for the team that this is. He doesn't need to be like an MVP or anything like that, obviously. He's also provided some pop with 25 home runs. He obviously also provides some edge. Now let's go to another new guy who's there because of the Corbin Burnes trade, Joey Ortiz. Now, he hasn't set the world on fire. He's not necessarily some star, but he's also in really his first big league season. He only played 14 games for the Orioles last year. This year, he's become Milwaukee's everyday regular third baseman who can also play at different infield positions too, but mostly third base. And last but not least, for the most impactful new names, is the most impactful new name. A guy who's just 20 years old and someone who the Brewers smartly locked up before he even played a big league game, giving him the biggest contract ever to a player who had never played a big league game, and it's paid off. The man is, again, 20 years old, and credit to him because he's had a very professional first season for someone of his age. I feel like that's a good way to describe it, considering he started off the year really bad, like really bad. He wasn't good. He struggled, but credit to him because for someone who you could easily see crumble due to the age and inexperience, and maybe he has to go back down to AAA or whatever, he's adjusted like a pro, and since June has been one of the best hitters in all of baseball. In the first 2 months, he hit 210. Since June, 300. I just find that pretty cool, and an even better sign that he's worth the contract. You can easily just look at his overall numbers and say he's been good, but when you look at how it's actually gone in context, it's an immediate sign of a pro, and even better things to come moving forward. So shout out to Cheerio. And to the MVP of the offense, Willy Adames. Now, I made a whole video just on this man and how awesome he's been, but to make it short here, Adames has consistently been one of the game's better overall shortstops and found a much more consistent time at the plate since getting traded from the Rays a few years ago. He's played almost every game this year, so that on its own is valuable, but then he's also arguably putting up the best year of his career. He's hit a career high in home runs, RBIs. He's just a very valuable player to have, especially at the premier position of shortstop. He also becomes a free agent after the season, so the elephant in the room says he probably won't be a Brewer for much longer. I hope that isn't the case, but forget that. He's been a Brewer in 2024. He's been good and one of the leaders of this team. And partly the reason it's so important he's been so good is because of who he's stepped up and had a career year in a time the Brewers needed it most, considering Christian Yelich went down for the season after having back issues. Which especially sucks because not that Yelich hasn't been good in the last few years, he has, but he was finally in some ways back to his MVP days in 2018 and 2019. Basically all his numbers were up and the highest they'd been since 2019, other than the power really, so it super sucked to see him have to cut his year short. So for Adames to put up a career year has been so vital. Same with the last but certainly not least offensive mention, William Contreras, who just continues to be arguably the best hitting catcher in baseball. This man has a stick and he uses it very well.
Hey, yo, pause.
Catchers aren't really expected to hit that well, but Contreras doesn't care for that stereotype because he hits for a good average, gets on base, has pop, and plays almost every single day, all while being only 26. Really nothing more to ask for. Up next, the pitching, starting with the new guys on that side of things too. Two of the most important pieces of the rotation are new, and I bet you didn't expect Snoop Dogg to be on the team. Tobias Myers is a rookie, and he's been awesome. Aaron Savale pulled a pitching version of Willy Adames from a few years ago by being a Ray for the first part of this year and being really bad with them before getting traded to the Brewers, and has been much, much better since. Brian Hudson is a first-year Brewer and a second-year big leaguer. Well, barely. He's a rookie this year after pitching just 8 innings for the Dodgers last year, so after his 5 minutes and in LA, he's come up clutch in Milwaukee. Jared Koenig found his way back into the big leagues after a hiatus in 2023, coming off a bad 2022 season with Oakland, and he's been pretty good. Nobody in the Brewer bullpen has necessarily been lights out. Just a lot of good arms, but arms that have done their job in a year. Their best reliever, who is lights out, had to miss the first 4 months because of stress fractures in his back, Devin Williams. And since he's come back, he's been as expected. Freaking disgusting. So he's the one guy who has been lights out, but he wasn't there for the longest time. So shout out to the rest of the guys. But as for Devin Williams, he had his one really bad game in St. Louis where he walked 3 guys and blew a save. But overall, he's been nasty as hell and really only gets into trouble when he can't locate. Like, he's not getting crushed out there at all. He strikes out the world. And back to the rotation, shout out Freddie Peralta, the longest tenured Brewer in this rotation. He leads the team in innings, has good strikeout stuff, and just continues to be the most reliable pitcher on really the whole pitching staff. And because of all this, because of all these guys and others doing what they've done and more, the Brewers not only just had yet another year ahead of the Cubs, but the gap between them and the Cubs hasn't changed at all. If anything, it's an even bigger gap. But overall, what I find to be the funniest part about the National League Central this year, literally nothing's changed. The Cardinals and Cubs don't necessarily suck. They don't, but they're not that good, and they're far behind the Brewers. Craig Counsell hasn't changed much by joining the Cubs. And as for the so-called up-and-coming teams I mentioned we all looked at heading into the year, the Reds and Pirates, those teams actually have kind of sucked. The Reds have been a real disappointment after the hype they left us with last year, and the Pirates, despite Paul Skeens lighting up the world, still suck. They're not good. The offense is weak, and another wasted potential of giving Andrew McCutchen, who actually has been one of the only good hitters, one last magical ride. And amidst all this amidst all this whatever, the Brewers are comfortably looking down on all of them, yet again like a king looking down at a bunch of peasants. It's like you're not even worth my attention. Not any of those teams, not any of those stupid YouTubers who called us dead before the season even began, nobody. And yeah, I'm gonna proudly take the L here. This team, one that's been good, gritty, consistent, and seemingly fearless, took my preseason take, chewed it up, and spit it right back in my face. And it's very well deserved. Congratulations, Milwaukee. You own me. For now, I guess. Let me know your thoughts, and thank you for watching.